Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Safira Rosanti with student ID number 2161211094. In this video, I will talk about learner autonomy. First, there is a quote from Galileo and Galilei. You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him find it within himself. Next, we move to definition of learner autonomy. What is learner autonomy is? Learner autonomy is ability to take charge of one's own learning. Main idea behind learner autonomy is that students should take responsibility for their own learning rather than be dependent on the teacher. Next is characteristic of autonomy. The first is concept-based in natural tendency for learners to take control over their learning. Autonomy may be displayed in different ways and to different degrees depending on each learner and learning situation. Learners who lack autonomy are capable of developing it given appropriate condition and preparation. The third, autonomous learning is more effective than non-autonomous learning. Next is version of autonomy. The first is technical. The act of learning a language outside the framework of an educational institution and without the intervention of a teacher. Second is psychological. The capacity which allows learners to take more responsibility for their own learning. The third is political. The conditions that allow learners to control the process and content of learning as well as the institutional context within which learning takes place. The fourth is social, the capacity to interact and collaborate with others. Next is characteristic of autonomous language learners. From seven main attributes, the first is have insight into their learning styles and strategies. The second, take an active approach to the learning task at hand. The third, are willing to take risks. The fourth, are good guessers. The fifth, attend to form as well as the content. That is, place importance on accuracy as well as appropriacy. The sixth, develop the target language into a separate reference system and are willing to revise and reject hypotheses and rules that do not apply. The last is have a tolerant and outgoing approach to the target language. What needs to happen first? The first is teacher becomes less of an instructor and more of a facilitator. The second is student discouraged from relying on the teacher as the main source of knowledge. The third is students' capacity to learn for themselves is encouraged. The fourth, students encouraged to make a decision about what they learn. The fifth, students' awareness of their own learning styles is encouraged. And the last is students encouraged to develop their own learning strategies. Next is example of Oxford's model of learner autonomy. The first is technical perspective. There is focus on physical situation. The second is psychological perspective. Focus on characteristic of learning. The third, sociocultural perspective. Focus on mediated learning. And the last is political critical perspective. Focus on ideologies, access, and power structure. Some background. Autonomy is generally seen as a characteristic of adults. Independent learning doesn't mean solitude. Autonomous learners are also part of communities of practice. Autonomy is not necessarily a characteristic that is seen as important in learning in all cultures. Designing courses that promote autonomy. Take into consideration. The first is learner goals. Second, the language learning process. Third, test and design. Fourth, learner strategies. Fifth, reflection on learning. I think enough from our section, and thank you for your nice attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.